So I hope you enjoyed the lunch and re-energized for the next discussion. I would like to introduce the session number 5. We have a distinguished panel here and a very interesting topic, I would say. As one of the proponents of this topic, I think there's something very interesting since the topic is called the external spoilers of EU integration, how Russia and China undermine EU integration. There should be a question mark there. For some reason, I don't know why, maybe it's my fault, there is no question mark. So if Russia and China undermines EU integration, I think this is the discussion we will have today. And if yes, then how? That would be my main question. How do you see the growing role of China in this? Is it done on purpose? Because we had discussions like yesterday during the coffee break that China has a lot of actions that indirectly might undermine EU integration, but it's not done on purpose to undermine EU integration, but it's done for its own reasons. Yeah, this is one of the questions. With Russia, is more self-evident, of course, because we have all the trio countries have Russia-sponsored conflicts on their territories, and certainly with Russia is more evident. But still, we had so many examples. I mean, I would like to remind just one of them with Ukraine, when Russia tried to postpone the implementation of the association agreement back in 2014 and created these trilateral consultations. That's why the association agreement of Ukraine started to be implemented much later than in case of Moldova and Georgia. So for this reason, I would like to, before handing the mic to the speakers, I would like to present the entire panel. So on the left side here is Sergiy Solodkyy, who is my colleague at the First Deputy Director at the New Europe Center. Then we have Paata Gaprindashvili, correct me if I'm wrong, Director of Georgia's Reform Associations. And we have lulian Chifu, President of Conflict Prevention and Early Warning Center from Bucharest. And we have Stefan Meister, who is Head of Program of International Order and Democracy at German Society of Foreign Policy, German Council of Foreign Policy in Germany, from Berlin, who recently returned from Caucasus, I believe, yeah. So I welcome the entire panel from Georgia, yeah. And I would like to, from trio country, yeah, so I would like to offer the floor to Sergiy. I would ask everyone to limit within 5-7 minutes the speech, and to have a discussion with the participants. And as well, we will have to end a little bit earlier, so we make sure that we start next panel at 4 o'clock. At 4 o'clock sharp. So thank you, Sergiy. You have the floor.
Thank you, Leo. Yes, you're absolutely right that in terms of Russia, everything is evident. Russia never hide its intention not to allow Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova to join EU. And all of its efforts are aimed at preventing our states to be successful on its European path. But what is evident on Russian front is not evident so much on a Chinese one, but I would hypothesize anyway that we may speak about a kind of invisible Sino-Russian alliance which puts certain efforts to hinder three states movement towards EU. What do I mean, and what is in common? What is in common between Beijing and Moscow, between Russia and China? And here I would like to be very precise, quoting certain documents which were signed by Russia and China this year, and one document was signed 11 years ago. and they definitely demonstrate this common ground for two states to undermine our efforts to become prosperous democratic nations as part of European family. So, the last document, this is a joint statement of Russia and China on the 20th anniversary of signing of the Treaty of Friendship. And the quote is, "The parties will continue their efforts to counter using human rights issues as a tool for interfering in the internal affairs of sovereign states." So we see here that China and Russia share the idea that liberal democracy, that human rights concept is a threat for their very existence. And we saw how Russia behaves countering and undermining pro-democratic movements, aspirations in our part of the world. China do almost the same by different tools. And I promise also to quote 11 years old document, which was also signed by presidents, by leadership of China and Russia in 2010. And there Beijing reaffirmed its support for Russia's efforts to protect its deeply rooted interests in the Commonwealth of Independent States. So we can see here that China and Russia for a long period of time tried to find common ground and countering human rights, countering pro-democratic aspirations is this common ground for two states. Talking about tools, first of all about Russia. All of us know that. I will try to quote, to list those tools in dynamic from maybe least threatening to more threatening. Propaganda, to create anti-European, anti-Western narratives in our states, economic pressure, blackmailing, gas wars, and of course using political actors in our countries to succeed with anti-European, anti-Western activities. And the most dramatic, catastrophic tool, it's a war passé, and keeping conflicts in procrastinated stance like in Georgia or in Moldova or in active phase like in Ukraine. And of course, occupied territories is a key tool used by Russia to keep, to hinder our pro-European, European movement. Talking about Chinese tools, I would say that they are rather ad hoc ones. When we are talking about Russian steps, they are more strategic, they are more conscious. In Chinese case, we do not see the same strategic approach maybe, but they react roughly, harshly, when they see that Ukraine, I'll be interested to listen to Georgian and Moldovan partners, how it is in Moldova and Georgia proceed. But when Ukraine joined, for example, statements where China is criticized for violation of human rights, China at the very moment blackmailed Ukraine to withdraw its signature from those documents. And we witnessed this summer, for example, when China used so-called vaccine diplomacy, when vaccine supplies were postponed, caused by Ukrainian signature on statement of 40 Western power states criticizing China for violation of human rights in Uyghur region. And another issue with China, it's of course about investments. Now in Ukraine, we see that China grew its investment presence quite clearly, but we still may talk about dynamic, that they grow rapidly, but this size of Chinese investment is still too small. It's approximately 0.5%. That is why we cannot say that Chinese investment for now is a huge and dramatic threat for Ukraine, like it happened in other states which we are aware of, like Montenegro or Sri Lanka or certain Central Asian states. And there is a question, does Ukrainian government understand properly the risks which may pose those investments, so-called investment hook? My experience and my talking to Ukrainian, to certain decision makers, Ukrainian, and my observations show that unfortunately not all Ukrainian decision makers understand properly the risks originated from China. Moreover, we saw certain documented evidence which underestimate the risks posed by China. And just recently, President signed the strategy of Ukraine on foreign policy activities, where China is mentioned as a country with which Ukraine will develop a strategic partnership, which clearly demonstrate not understanding, I would even say, the global environment in general, because China is definitely regarded by closest Ukrainian partner, US, as an enemy. China is regarded and considered by European Union in different spheres as a threat as well, in particular, for example, in cybersecurity sphere, where Ukraine would like to cooperate with the EU. And of course, it lacks logic to a certain extent when you would like to get deeper cooperation with European Union in terms of cybersecurity, when you understand that China and Russia are playing a catastrophic role in that regard, but you name and call that country, China, a strategic partner. So I will stop here and...
Yeah, I already have a question for you, but let's first move to Paata and see the Georgian perspective, I mean, of what Russia and China may if they play a role in the European integration, and how would you present this, I mean, from the perspective of as an impediment, I mean, for the implementation of the association agreement or for the overall moving towards the West? Please, Paata.
I perhaps, for understandable reasons, you would not be surprised, mentioned Russia much more frequently in my brief speech, I hope, than China. Well, first and foremost, trio countries remain unfinished business for Russia, and I may repeat some aspects from Sergiy's intervention. Well, the main objective, of course, of Russia, and let us pay attention to this, is to bring Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine back to its sphere of influence, and therefore not to allow these countries to enter either to European Union or to NATO. Well, there is a conclusion, judgment, prediction, whatever we might call that, coming decade at minimum will see Russia and other rivals, including China, of course, seeking to advance their illegitimate geopolitical interests further in the EAP region and elsewhere. So Sergiy talked about tools in the Kremlin's weaponry to achieve those goals in our countries, and of course these are attempted annexation and illegal occupation, unresolved conflicts, in addition, of course, massive disinformation, anti-Western propaganda campaigns. And campaigns, thank you, have been taking place for many years now. and as a part of the hybrid warfare, and they will continue many years to come. So with its multiple tools and leverages, Russia is indeed a major spoiler to undermine EU integration for our countries. And again, no doubt that Russia will continue with its efforts to increase a polarization of the political landscape and society in general in our respective countries, as well as make our countries indefensible, non-reformable, and not worth investing in the eyes of the West. But let me deviate a bit from the subject of talking only about the external spoilers, and let me say this. Apart from Russia, of course, being a spoiler, we should also have in mind other factors, and I call them factors rather than calling spoilers, as well, which painfully protract the integration process. So first and foremost, there is a domestic factor, which is about a weakness to sustain reforms, to sustain efforts to reform judiciary, rule of law, and fight against corruption. And last but not the least, the EU itself, to a certain degree, of course, can be viewed as one of the factors to this respect as well. We talked quite a lot today, yesterday. Let me perhaps repeat that as it is widely recognized in the EU, the absence of a credible EU strategy towards the Western Balkans would reduce the EU's credibility and potentially fuel nationalistic rhetoric and to a certain extent autocratic sentiments in the region, whilst opening the door to the influence of third country powers, in particular Russia and China. So let us be sure that this is even truer in the in case of the EAP, in case of a trio. Well, I myself really believe that eventually the EAP will play much more significant role for the European Union politically, economically, and in terms of security, and perhaps even a greater role than that of the Western Balkans. Well, therefore, again, let me repeat of what was already discussed these days during our meeting, that enlargement as one of the main tools for the EU for dealing with its neighbors should not be terminated at minimum. I'm not suggesting, of course, the next day, literally, we get the either perspective and the membership, of course. I was talking to Stefan Meister today that some of you may not know that during Angela Merkel's visit to Georgia in August 2018, she named Georgia, Ukraine. For some reasons, she omitted to mention Moldova at that time. And she regarded those countries as the next potential part of the states with which the EU may start talks following the accession of the Western Balkan countries. And undoubtedly, this approach needs to be backed in real terms. So again, let me repeat, what we request is that Western Balkan region and the trio region, let me say, to be treated equally. And I also concur, surprisingly, perhaps, to what Nicholas was saying, that we should continue reforming. We should not be backtracking, but rather we should continue reforming, as a result of which then we may start talking to the European Union and asking for the European perspective. However, while that could be true, we should not forget that unless we have this perspective one day to become the members of the European Union, we physically risk to become a part of the Russian Federation. Well, now, as it is recognized, of course, if incentives for good behavior disappear, so do disincentives for bad behavior. Now, I'm not suggesting to put a burden on the shoulders of the European Union for all the mischiefs and misgivings what we might be having in our respective countries in the trio. But of course, the EU should become even more engaged, as it was said, much more demanding and watchful how the billions of euros of assistance are being spent in our countries by putting strong monitoring and measurement mechanisms together with benchmarks. Well, recently, as we know, Moldova has again, and rightly so, become front runner or champion or a leader in the Eastern Partnership. I myself maybe am not a big fan of crowning the countries in that manner. However, I have to say that the reason it has advanced ahead of Georgia, for instance, is not only the remarkable, truly remarkable changes in Moldova, but quite a stalemate and stagnation in Georgia. So allow me to be a bit country-specific now. Certain developments in Georgia make Georgian allies, watchers, quite concerned over the country's democratic and European integration perspective. And for the first time, that echoes, of course, the subject of our topic, of our panel. For the first time, perhaps, in the EU-Georgia's relations, Tbilisi has refused to fulfill those obligations it had taken before the EU. And by the way, Tbilisi stated yesterday, our colleagues were talking about this particular subject, that it refused 75 million euros assistance, a loan from the European Union side for some good economic reasons. However, as was clearly explained by the EU delegation, Georgia would not be receiving a loan owing to the failure to respect the commitments it took, that is to sufficiently address the condition for this macro-financial assistance, and notably to increase the independence, accountability, and quality of the judicial system. And perhaps very few words, which is yet another sort of alarming demonstration of a complex of reasons. Russia's influence, domestic factor, as I was trying to outline already, yet another demonstration how perhaps one of the most important projects over the last years in Georgia, and that is the Anaklia deep sea port project, has been at minimum delayed, if not cancelled. A project which was rightly regarded as a project of very important project for Georgia's European integration, very important regional project as well. The EU still recognizes this project as being very important. If you go to the recent documents of the European Union, it still highlights the importance of the connectivity through the Black Sea. However, while we talk about the connectivity, of course, we should be practical, and we should be making real steps forward how to get back this project back to the agenda. And of course, during the Q&A, perhaps, session, I would be able to cover this issue even in a greater length. Thank you.
Thank you, Paata, for this perspective, for Georgian perspective. It was very rich in examples, both from Russia and from certain domestic issues or views. I somehow missed China. Maybe you could get back in the second round with some few additions.
In the context mostly of Anaklia Deep Sea project,
please
not only, but indeed, yeah, I will try to cover that as well.
Please do refer to China as well. And now we're moving to Julian and Stefan. First, Julian, who is representing a Romanian think tank, but I think Julian can speak in detail about also influences in Moldova, but also from a perspective of a EU country. And maybe Julian and Stefan, you could also refer to the question whether, from your perspective, Russia and China are competing in our region, or they are overlapping. Because Sergiy gave some examples where clearly they are somehow partnering against the liberal democracies. But I see also some signs of competition. So how do you assess, how do you see these things? Thank you, Julian.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I will talk about Russia and China and the big picture, I mean, because for sure discussing about how these could be spoilers of the evolution in the Eastern Partnership countries, it is also about their relation with the EU. It's about their global posture, not only about the bilateral relationships that those two countries do have with the different countries in the region, Eastern Partnership, or in the Western Balkans as well. So I will have 5 points, and I will say for the end 2 references on energy security, gas crisis, and also on EU-China policy, how this is shaped and is moving in the future. My first point is about, for sure, the big picture, which is to look a little bit on how the world we are living in is moving on, if you want, in a post-pandemic, even though it's a little bit difficult to say that at this point. For sure, we are discussing about a US-China rivalry, and who could also influence the position of Russia in this trio. For sure, EU is at the same time dragging to the same framework and has to decide which way to go. Okay, we've had a position which was not very, how should I put it, very diplomatically, very welcomed at the origin, so we are somewhere in the middle between. Then no, we discovered that we have the same values with the EU, with the US, and we move more to the transatlantic position. Then things move the right way. We have the second point, which is about this rivalry, democracies and versus autocracies. We like it or not, framed or not by the Biden administration or by somebody else, it's a fact of life. And by the way, we are going to witness quite very soon, actually December should be the time frame, summit of democracies hosted by the US. Romania is still holding for the second year the presidency of the Community of Democracies. As you know, it's a part of the game. Multilateralism, we have 2 points, 2 reference points. First is the initiative of France and Germany, who moves the right way. It's a complementarity with the Summit of Democracies. And at the same time, we had this reunion that has been hosted by UN Security Council, provoked by Russia, but we already have the framework. Who has done what is Russia's position, China's position, permanent members of the Security Council for sure. And it's also an opening of how things are moving on. We have also a big theme, I will not enter into the detail about the bilateral relation, transatlantic relation, which is as important as the previous one, which are shaping for sure EU's policies and how to refer to this reality. And at the same time, we have a very important assessment who actually launched the ad interim guidelines of national security strategy of Biden's administration, who basically says that, okay, US is no longer a dominant power, meaning ready and able to shape the rules of the game and the new world order, and it needs multilateralism and to engage all the democracies in such a way that all together we can move in that direction. My second point goes on 3 moments that are coming in the last 6 months or so, who actually are shaping directly the first intentions and the big picture into a very awkward direction. Maybe we can come back via the question. It's about the big challenges to this type of cohesion of democracies, and I'm talking about the retreat from Afghanistan, the AUKUS, and I will add the Evergarden, which is basically about the future of a probable economic crisis, which involves energy, container crisis, supply chain crisis, and lessons learned from the pandemic, where we discovered then when we need at the same time the same products, we are we are falling under one producer, or at least big chains that are passing via one country. And all of this is actually shaping the real relationship, that very country being China, who has used extensively during the pandemic its dominant position in that respect to try to influence and to use political advantages during the pandemic. My third point is about the EU. The EU and its added values at the global level, which are very important. The first one I will underline is the green energy and the whole process and the policies in shaping this economy, this green economy, which has been launched, if not already embraced completely by the Biden program of governance, even though it doesn't have already trajectory inside the Congress. We have the capacity of making consensus with a lot of actors. That's the EU, 27, 28 in some other times. That's an added value, and that's an important capacity that can be projected at a global level with the new global governance. And the third point is about the normative power that EU shown everybody, and if somebody has some doubt, go ask London and the UK and how the negotiations for post-Brexit do happen. So it's also another point that has added an attractivity for the EU, which is the financial new gen projects and actually the mutualization of the debt for relaunching the economy post-pandemic. It also has some tracks which are related to Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership, which can be used extensively, provided that those countries do embrace the EU track, and it means also moving to embracing the policies in the green energy and in the digitalization, which is far more easy. My fourth point is about the relevance of Russia and China relations. We didn't spoke before that, but it was obvious that we need to discuss about this bilateral relation and the strategic relation. And I can tell you that there are very important nuances, if not differences, if not clashes between the two big powers, autocracies. And actually, we can talk about two big powers, US and China nowadays, and a regional power, Russia. For sure, the regions of Russia are all around its huge territory, which makes a difference from all the other regional powers. But actually, Russia is more inclined for turbulence, for conflict, for instability, taking profit, challenging, bullying, if you want, everybody around. I'm not talking only about the countries that are very easy to put in distress. China, on the contrary, because it is inclined for doing business and for making their advantages, it is more inclined to calm, to stability, to patience, except for some of the nervousness related to, we've seen Hong Kong, now Taiwan, South China Sea, for sure, or One Belt, One Road as a mean of achieving strategic aims. So actually there is a difference, and for sure, we are going maybe to enter into the detail. There are big clashes, and there's a full range of issues like Siberia, Far East, Russia's Far East, or Central Asia, or even Russia's policy in the Indo-Pacific, and we can add to that, you name it. My fifth point is about Russia's type of behaviors or strategies which are related to taking advantage on vulnerabilities. I will put that, I will rate that as a major fact, even more than the assertiveness or the force that it is used by Russia in several parts. We do have those conflicts in the area, but they are coming from different ages, actually. So it happens inside the transatlantic relationship. They are trying to make the fragmentation and a rift or to accentuate or to deepen that inside the European Union, using not only the extreme left as it has been in terms of the Comintern and after that in the Soviet Union and during the Cold War, but populist, extremist, Islamophobic, everybody actually who can make the difference. In Western Balkans, in Eastern Partnership, searching for niches actually where it can be involved. So Russia is more assertive, aggressive, a role in energy and in gas crisis. China is more insidious. It uses debts, loans, economic dependency, technology, but it doesn't mean that it is softer. It is deeper, is more insidious, and actually everything of this is related to the resilience that could be built up inside the EU. And there are two ways: either getting to this idea of Europeanization and resilience in the EU and getting teaming up with the EU, or the easy version, which means finding an easy solution as of today and losing the big picture and the strategic possibilities for tomorrow. And I have the
Julian,
two points. The 2 points on energy and gas crisis. It is a test for Republic of Moldova, or not for Ukraine, but it is less able. How pro-European those countries are, and political squeeze is there, and we have the problems that they have infringed the spot market inside the EU. I'm not entering into the details about the new prices and how they took advantage. It is a global problem, but it has been amplified by Russia's policies in the region, and for sure taking advantage is meaning right now if there's a vulnerability, if somebody blinks, they're out. And EU-China policy, I will just say 2 words. One is the communication of the Commission 2019 March, and the second, last point on China, is the debate about putting real costs on products that are produced by a country with a different approach to human rights, with pollution, with CO2, with forced labor, Uyghur and so on. And all of these is on the debate. European Commission, European Parliament, German Parliament has discussed this with the companies that they have in the Uyghur region in Xinjiang. So actually it's a trend, and the countries in the region need to adapt to this trend instead of taking the easy way and trying to take advantage of some very, very good offers. So actually it's about how to say no in the two points that I underline. How to be able to say no and to explain to your population that you are saying no to an offer that apparently is very, very attractive and would solve some of your problems. So that's also a very important test for the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian, for widening the perspective as well on the Russia and China's role in various countries, not only in our region. So, Stefan, I pass the floor to you, and with the same question, actually, with the same questions, how these 2 countries influence the region, spoil or not the European integration, because some believe it's not happening, especially in China, and are they competing or are they partnering? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you also for the invitation. I really enjoy the conference. I really enjoy the setting, and it's also a pleasure to speak and to discuss with you. And it's really a pleasure to have breaks and to talk with each other, not in Zoom. I also have to mention this. So I have 2 main theses, which I very shortly will develop. First thesis is, or first argument is, despite different approaches, China and Russia interaction is increasing. They mutually learning from each other, and they both challenge the Western impact and norms regionally and globally. And this has an impact also on the Eastern Partnership countries. And the second is that domestic vulnerabilities makes it easier for Russia and China to undermine EU integration and democratization of the three countries. So I think that has also already been mentioned, but I just developed this also from my side. And I'm doing at the moment a bigger research on China's and Russia's interaction in different regions and how they balance their interests. So, and really very short, I will mention this here. So both China and Russia have different strategies towards Eastern Partnership region and partly different interests. Both, as authoritarian states, help to undermine democratic development of the countries, and both learn from each other and support each other in formats like the UN Security Council, for instance. They have found ways to balance their interests and do it to the weakness of the EU and the limited interest of the US in the also Eastern Partnership region. China, like Russia, China, like Turkey, I also want to mention here Turkey, is discussed in some Eastern Partnership countries as an alternative to balance Russia. I think that this is an illusion. As we have learned from practices of competition and cooperation in Central Asia, for instance, in the context of the Shanghai Organization and BRI and Eurasian Economic Union, both are able to find solutions and rather benefit from their different ways of regional policy. Both share the interest to weaken Western US influence globally, regionally, and particularly in their direct neighborhood. While Russia's regional policy is spatial-oriented, China thinks functional. So this is really the difference in the approach. While Beijing wants economic development to set its own norms and standards, also in competition to the EU, and tries to use existing institutions to change the rules of the game, for Russia, political influence is linked to geopolitical and security questions. And they are at the center of Russia's policy. So it's really different goals and different approaches. At the same time, China's leadership understands that Russia sees the post-Soviet region as its sphere of influence and respects this view, at least rhetorically. At the same time, it tries to bring these countries increasingly under its economic influence, and I think we can see this with the Belt and Road Initiative, which has a local, regional, and a global component. So, what plays in the hands, and this brings me to the second argument of both actors, is the political culture in the three countries with informal ties, corruption, weak institutions, lack of rule of law, which are important entry points of influence of Russia and China. So while the EU has the interest to change this legacy, they have the interest to keep exactly this legacy, because these are the entry points. And I think this is something we have to concentrate, and we constantly discuss this, so this is nothing new to you, but I think that's important also to discuss here. And I think here the EU has, with its neighborhood policy mainly, failed to also do it to the resistance of the local elites, and I think also its rather bureaucratic approach. Yeah, so we discussed this today. So it's a lot about politics. Yeah, and you need to address this. Yeah, I think there's no sustainability in key reform areas due to weak institutions and informality, especially in the area of judiciary, legal reforms, prosecution. I think that's the main area. And there are big gaps between written laws and political practice. Yeah, so you can have wonderful laws, but you still have informal ways to make decisions and to implement decisions. To change this reality is often not in the interest of the national elites, because it undermines their power position. So it's all about power. And all this plays in the hand of Russia and China, because the Soviet and post-Soviet practices help to undermine EU integration, discredit the elites, and sustainable democratic reforms. And I think, furthermore, the winner-takes-all mentality is still dominant and also a problem here. And I think what we can observe, just to give this example also from the Chinese side, they are testing the rules and the norms in the country. So if they go into an investment in Eastern Partnership countries, they're testing how much labor standards, environmental standards are really implemented and monitoring. And if this is not the way, if there's no monitoring, or if they can bribe, they undermine exactly these norms and standards. Yeah. So, and I think that's a big problem, because these are often the norms and standards which have been introduced with the EU, and then they undermine them because the implementation is lacking. Both are, but especially Russia is very active in the sphere of disinformation. We all know about this. I don't speak about this here longer. But also, I think here, the local situation plays in the hands of Russia. The polarization of the political system by ruling elites, like, for instance, in Georgia, the instrumentalization also by the use of the Russia card, plays often in the hand of Russian propaganda. A major problem is the ownership of media, the lack of independent media, which is more in the hands of specific actors and interest groups. So already without Russian interference, we can say there is sufficient disinformation in social media of the three states. But then Russia is fooling sentiments which are already in the societies, in the political discourse, with conspiracy, which we just recently observed with COVID-19 and vaccine policy. So Russia is using the weaknesses and the things which are already there and playing it quite well, not only in the Eastern Partnership countries, also in the EU. Yeah. So, and this brings me to my last point. I think, yes, the lack of membership perspective and offer beyond association agreement and DCFTAs undermine the democratic path of the three states. At the same time, I'm also sometimes not sure if really all important parts of the national elites really have an interest to have this full integration and adaptation with the EU. I see here also a lot of rhetoric, because it might question also their power position. And then they opened here also the door for Russian discrediting also EU integration. The decreasing transformative power of the EU, with its limited ability to deal with anti-liberal and anti-democratic tendencies in the EU itself, have also negative impact on the Eastern Partnership countries. I think we should also have this in mind. It needs a more clear and sophisticated conditionality by the EU and tougher sanctions by non-fulfillment. At the same time, the bureaucratic approach has reached its limits, and cooperation with civil society can be also improved. So I see a very so we talk always about support of civil society by the EU, and there's a lot of funding and so on, but then if it comes to projects, a lot of development aid, yeah, it's mostly talking with the political elites and not involving sufficiently also civil society in these processes. The elite-driven, so yeah, I think there's a need for a more comprehensive policy by the EU, which brings the different strategies of the member states and the EU together. Sometimes they just do in parallel the same, and maybe even compete with each other. The lack of a final goal is a weak spot for attracting more society pressure on the national elites. There's a growing disorientation also about the path of reforms and policy because of the crisis of Western liberal democratic model. And all this plays in the hand of Russia and partly also China, because it is used in their anti-EU narratives. And just to make this also as a final point, as a German, because I'm here so often addressed as a German, I'm not a Germany expert, but I'm more a Russia expert. So I think the example of Nord Stream 2 show how counterproductive egoistic interests and the lack of a comprehensive strategy by EU member states towards Russia can be. Yeah. So we give in the end Russia an instrument to manipulate us and undermine our own prestige in the region, and we are not able to adapt, but we further in the end play in the end and weaken Russia's role, Russia's bargaining role towards the EU, its member states, big member states, and then in the end also towards the Eastern Partnership countries. So I agree with you also these domestic issues and the foreign issues. So I stop here.
Thank you, Stefan. If you would give, I was just thinking while you were speaking, and when you mentioned about the EU membership, that it undermines as well, the lack of EU membership, I thought, if this would be an interview, I know the headline. What would be the headline in Ukrainian media that the EU undermines as well by lacking EU membership? But then you mentioned Nord Stream 2, and I said, well, no, this is the headline actually for the Ukrainian media. So thank you for highlighting on this issue as well. We have roughly 20 minutes for discussion, for Q&A, for commenting. So I see the first hand. And I'd like to ask Daniel to comment, question, whatever.
Short question to Sergiy Solodkyy about China. How widespread and how strong is kind of China lover circle in Ukraine? I remember this picture taken at the Chinese embassy summer this year. So we got the oligarchs, the prominent politicians, both from the ruling party and from the opposition, representatives of the government, of the MFA. Is this only, I mean, the reason is, as you said, lack of understanding that China comes, or Chinese assistance comes with the strings attached, or there is something more like, I don't know, listening to the wind of change and Ukraine's own pivot to Asia, or trying to play kind of game between the US and China, win one over another. If you could elaborate on that, that would be great.
Thank you a lot. My observation is likewise, I would say that Chinese lobby and China lovers camp is growing in Ukraine, and it is primarily due to lack of knowledge, I would say. But in the last months, in the last year, we've seen lots of criticism in public sphere, mass media, Ukraine experts criticized political decisions, certain political decisions in, so to say, Chinese realm, when Ukrainian experts criticized certain steps in sensitive spheres. And I would say that now we are witnessing another, maybe, turn in that pro-Chinese camp. It is a bit less popular to demonstrate this pro-Chinese love currently. However, we still see manifestation, reflection, clear reflection of misunderstanding of the problem. Like I mentioned, strategy on foreign policy activities where China is mentioned as strategic partner. Why it happened? Lack of understanding. Another issue may be China is perceived somehow as a substitute model for Ukrainian citizens or Ukrainian leadership, because at certain stage, certain period of time, Russia was perceived as model country for Ukraine, for lots of Ukrainians, so to say. After aggression of Russia, it appeared to be a kind of vacuum for citizens who loved strong hand, so to say, authoritarian model. We have still these people in the country. They preferred Belarusian model to last events. I would say now there are less lovers of Lukashenko's model, luckily in Ukraine, fortunately in Ukraine. But 2 years ago, fortunately of course, 2 years ago Lukashenko was the most popular and favorite president for Ukrainians, unfortunately again. And maybe China is a kind of substitute for those pro-authoritarian citizens, to a certain extent. Our center asked Ukrainians a year ago, do you perceive China as a threat for Ukraine? Yes, it was an opinion poll, and approximately 75 of Ukrainians answered no, China is not a threat. It also example about perception, public perception. And of course, the same feeling you may encounter among decision makers in Ukraine. And again, but it's again about lack of information. And it's a task for us, for experts, for journalists, to make Ukrainian decision makers and citizens more informed about real risks which dependence on China may provoke.
Yeah. Paata would like to add something.
Yeah, well, on China, first what I would like to mention is, well, we suppose, first of all, I agree, in Georgia too, we do not have a strategy developed about what policy Georgia should have vis-a-vis China. But so far, so good. That is the overwhelming feeling in the country. And now on the positive side on Georgia-China relations, first of all, Georgia does not border to China. China does recognize Georgia's territorial integrity and sovereignty and territorial integrity. We do have free trade agreement with China. That's a good part of the story. What could be a negative part of the story, and I do not want to personify Georgian politics, however, number of high-ranking officials from time to time, they worked for the companies who been doing business with China. Well, surely Chinese interest and pressure will grow in Georgia, but what should be clear already now for Georgians and for the people in Georgia and for the elites in Georgia is that Chinese would never care, of course, if Georgia's state institutions in Georgia are further weakened, if we further distance from the independence of judiciary, etc. So it's not about that. So that would, of course, facilitate, if you will, certain autocratic instincts, even in Georgia, that it's much easier to cooperate, to work with Chinese than with Europeans, with Americans, etc. Now, a few words on the Anaklia deep sea port project in the context of what we do not do. Well, I myself truly think that there is no such a Chinese pressure and entrenched interest in Georgia, although they do have this one Belt and Road. However, in order you to yield pressure, either be it Russia or potential pressures in the perspective from China, of course you do work, to increase the level of investment from Europe, from Americans, etc. That was exactly what this Anaklia Deep Sea project was about. And by the way, Mike Pompeo, former State Secretary, he openly standing together with Georgia's then Prime Minister Bakhtadze was openly calling upon Georgian authorities complete with Anaklia Deep Sea Port in order you to be able to yield the pressure either from Russia or China. That's exactly we have not done up until now, and we cancelled as of now fulfilling that project. So there are, and that applies to all countries in TRIO. Before even the long-term strategy, policy strategy toward China is shaped and put together, of course, even before that, one should continue reforming, one should continue attracting the foreign direct investment, Western foreign direct investment in our respective countries. And that's the best, shield, in the future to yield the pressure.
I see. Thank you, Paata. I saw Stefan raising the hand. So
yeah.
Before we go back to the Q&A, Stefan, please.
I just wanted to react also to Anaklia, because I think that's a highly disputed topic, also who impacts whom and why. And it's really important topic. In 2018, before I went to Georgia, I was talking with all the stakeholders in Berlin about Georgia and the South Caucasus, and I talked also to the Eastern Committee of the German economy and asked them also about Anaklia, so and why German companies maybe not invest. And they told me there's one German company who is also a big investor in a port in Ukraine, has a huge interest to invest in Anaklia. Had a huge interest. They traveled 2 times to Georgia, and then it was just too hot for them, too political. So they just saw that this is a game between different groups of elites, and they were just saying, no, under these conditions we are not investing here. But there was a serious interest. So they told me it was really a serious investment because they wanted to link also Odessa, Anaklia, yeah, so and the Black Sea, but then in the end they did not do the investment. I just want to bring a second example also how China is partly successful acting in Georgia, because I think China has also failed in Georgia. It has a lot of investment ruins in the country, and it's not so easy to adapt to the local conditions. So let's call it like this. But what we can see is a lot of international money through EBRD into infrastructure. Chinese are winning the tenders, implementing these infrastructure projects, and then they do it according to their own rules. Yeah, so in terms of environmental standards, in terms of labor and social standards, and the Georgian state is not really, how to say, monitoring in a sufficient way that the rules are implemented, which were agreed. Yeah, so and you can also see how tricky the things are.
Just one very short comment on China. I just recalled quite an unprecedented statement, as it was dubbed, even undiplomatic statement from Polish ambassador recently in Georgia, who said that, well, the EU is funding important infrastructural projects in Georgia, but tenders then are won by Chinese. So it means that while we here in the EU are contemplating how to best counter China's influence, we are channeling money to Chinese in Georgia.
I see. And I liked your comments, and I liked the metaphor of Stefan about local conditions, could not adapt to local conditions. You know, it's not only Chinese could not adapt to local conditions, but European business quite often is not able to adapt to local conditions. And I remember one funny case a few years ago. I was talking to a Moldovan agri-food company, and they were told, look, there's a Canadian rating which told we have the most eco-friendly products. And I say, well, how did you succeed? He said, we didn't succeed because we wanted to produce eco-friendly. It's just that we do not have money for the chemicals, so we grow it like it is. So it's precisely the right thing for the wrong reason, yeah, which happened then. So local conditions, very interesting. So I turn back to the audience for comments or questions, if you have any comments or questions. If you don't have, there's Sergiy who wants to reply, and Julian then.
Thank you. I just want to add one more idea to the question Daniel asked about Chinese attractiveness among Ukrainians. You know, China does not have tough conditionality towards Ukraine, for example, or any other nations. The only condition to give loans is not to criticize Chinese stance on human rights. Just shut up, that's all. And we give you money, lots of money. When you need to take money from Western institutions, you need to be eligible to very tough conditionality. When you like to be integrated into EU and to get certain advantages, for example, you will have also strong conditionality without membership perspective. That is why Chinese investment and proposal might look definitely more attractive than, for example, European. And that is a big question and big challenge also for EU, and this question should not be underestimated because it clearly means about real fundamental threats for security, for continental security.
Thank you, Sergiy. Julian.
Okay, I will make 3 points. The first one, there are moments where you should accept and be less shy in really blame, name, and shame for your relation with, for instance, Russia. It's very easy, nuances are important, avoiding building new enemies or, I don't know, conditions to have cold relations with third parts, with different actors, but actually, and that's my second point, multivectoralism has died with Yanukovych here, I suppose, in Ukraine, more or less. Well, it happens the same with China. Multivectoralism is not a solution for the relationship between the West and China. By the way, you need to choose, but I suppose that you've already chosen. The countries that are in the trio, they are associating countries to the EU, it means that you've already chosen your path towards democracy and convergence with the policies with the West. It is also about choices. Yeah, you need to prove to be and to live by pro-European position, and it also means making this choice, at least taking the papers related to common communique of the Commission, Council, whatever, on China, and look how things develop there, how they are on the line there. And I'm not talking about the Trump papers in December 2019, who actually says the same thing with a different formula and less diplomatic approach. And my third point is about the geographic perspective. Yes, China is far. It's very difficult to see how things have evolved in, I don't know, in Sri Lanka or in the, there's a lot of lessons learned from the Pacific Island states. It's far away. But I suppose that there are moments where you should raise your nose from the very region, from the very, you know, if you want to move to make businesses and to realize what does it mean on the proper experiences. It's also a part of the game, and it's also a part of being a part of the world and decided which way to go. So democracies comes also with all those issues, choices, and I'm very sorry. I have to notify you that you've already made a choice. So live up to those choices. Thank you.
Choice is complicated. Yeah, I see Katerina having a question, the last question, by the way, because we have to start the next session at 4 o'clock sharp.
Okay, so thank you for giving me this opportunity. I would like to add one more variable to the formula you're discussing. What about the United States? So they are clearly currently choosing the right stance between deterring China and deterring Russia, but not alienating too much to keep options open for alliances against China. At the same time, there is this Australian deal, which has caused much frustration in Paris, but not only in Paris. So maybe any of the panelists would like to comment on how US plays out into this formula. Thank you.
Yeah, Julian and Stefan, then I saw raising hands. If anyone else, please. Okay. Julian, so you're the first one. Please use the mic.
Thank you very much. Okay, for sure, it's another point of contentions when some countries says, well, but there are differences between the US and the EU position. What should I do? How can I join the West when there are those? It's the same one saying, look, but at the level of the EU, we also have Hungary who is doing whatever, and Poland who is doing something, and at some point Italy doing something on. Look, we already have the papers, we already know how to align, and I don't think that you have enough strategic weight to play between the big players. Actually, there's a saying, we are saying that in Romania for our political guys, when the lion and the tiger go hunt, the little animals should stay more on the cover and try to avoid to speculate or to take advantage. There are some countries who are doing that. Maybe it is their advantage. If you look at the 15 years long-term contract that Budapest has closed down with Russia, playing in their strategic hands, but on the mid and long run, I'm not very sure that the Hungarian citizens are going to be very happy with what is happening in the region. So that would be my answer. And with the AUKUS, just a small sign. The fact that France had some problems with commercial, underline, commercial agreement, it doesn't change the fact that the substance of the AUKUS is a transfer of technology from US and UK, by the way, the first after 50 years, to an allied country. And it will happen more if you take the statements of President Bush after the meeting. He says, and we are going to continue the transfer to Japan, India, and France, by the way. So this fact that one country has certain interest, it doesn't mean that the EU is going to move with them. We were very completely reluctant and even notified the Commission that it's not their position to go with the flow, with whatever France and President Macron is doing. So it's not EU position in those terms. So, but these are the little things that are making the difference, and the richness, I will say, of our democracy. That's why we are democracies, and that's why EU and transatlantic NATO are a democratic organization. It makes this being richer and having options and alternatives. Thank you.
Stefan, please.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's positive that the US under Biden is concentrating more again on rule of law, yeah, and is also mentioning this and is investing in this more. But I think the trend of the withdrawal of the US from Europe and also Eastern Europe is visible. We have an isolationistic approach, and we have this one thematic foreign policy, which is China. And I think this is to hand over Russia to the Germans and to make the Nord Stream 2 deal also with Germany will not solve any problems with the Russian. In the opposite, it will give Russian side more opportunities to spoiler also transatlantic relations. And I think exactly Nord Stream 2 is this stick to spoiler not only EU disputes, but also transatlantic relations. And I think here really, in my opinion, Biden administration underestimates the spoiler capabilities of Russian leadership. Yeah, and also to have the idea maybe you in your back that maybe you need Russia also somehow because of China. I think it's a deadlock. It's not. I think it's a wrong approach, and I think neither Germany nor EU are prepared to act in a relevant way without the US. Yeah. So I think there was this kind of always not burden sharing, but both had their role. Yeah. And I think we are not able to do certain kind of things, and we can discuss the Balkan, yeah, and Balkans and other regions without the US. We are not prepared just for it, and I think that's very dangerous, in my opinion.
Thank you, Stefan. We'll have two.
Can I challenge, just for the record, I can challenge the retreat of the US from Eastern Europe. That was it. That was it.
Ah, that was it.
I'm just challenging the fact that it was a statement, yes, by Stefan that US is retreating from Central Eastern Europe. At least, if not from Europe as a whole. If it retreats from Germany, at some respect, maybe, but...
Yeah, Sergiy, very short.
Yeah, very briefly, I agree with, I concur with what Stefan was saying, and that policy, if not a shift, but refocusing, started already during President Obama's times. Since then, what, for instance, in Georgia, we've been witnessing was kind of a zigzag American engagement. For instance, so when it came to conflict resolution and Georgia's relations with Russia. However, there are certain positive signs, recent positive signs as well. Stefan said about one, that Americans at least try to re-engage and they are focusing back on rule of law. But on the other hand as well, we've seen certain dynamics from the side of Americans in Western Balkans, for instance, and there is a hope that Americans will, as they used to in the past, they will be pushing, for instance, European capitals in order to push forward the Western Balkans accession to the European Union. So there are signs of that as well.
Thank you, Paata. Sergiy.
I just would like to quote our opinion poll, which I already quoted. So we asked Ukrainians when we'll see escalation of tensions between US and China. Whom should Ukraine support in that conflict, in that tension, Americans or Chinese? So 40% of Ukrainians answered US, 10% of Ukrainians answered China, 50% of Ukrainians said, we do not know. So we can see that, of course, certain majority, so to say, pro-American in Ukraine, but half of Ukrainians have this pro-balance neutral position still.
Yeah, I prepared some conclusions, but because of lack of time, I'm skipping this, so we can enjoy the coffee. I would like to mention just one thing to underline, that at New Europe Center we will prepare a comparative report on spoiler capacity of China and Russia, both in EU, in Europe, and in Asia, with some partners from the region. And I would like to remind again that please don't leave. We have a very interesting session ahead again, which starts at 4 o'clock sharp. Now, please enjoy the coffee and join me in saying thank you to this gentleman for their contribution.